Neela will make a presentation and then we will get on to the... Okay, let's start.
Well, for the following weeks, okay. So I'm going to present my take on the reading materials that we have for this week, Problem of India's compilation of letters from Rabindranath Tagore, that due to the what we call that constriction of time and knowledge, I'm just going to sort of take some points in the writing which I find interesting or which I find that we need to discuss more about it. And I'm not going to take up lots of your time, probably just around 15 minutes or so. So I'm just going to get started. Have mercy on me. Okay. Wrong. Okay. So the first thing that I took note of in the reading materials that we have for this week is the statement from Tagore that he mentioned. He talks a lot about the problem of India, but even the whole materials I was titled "The Problem of India," and he mentioned that our problem is not spiritual but social. In his first letter to Myron Phelps, okay, he first of all mentioned how India is divided by numberless differences, of religions, of races, and there are so many social factors there. And there's also the caste system, which divided the people systematically, and he saw this as something that made the people not only submissive, so there's this inherent submission inside the people, not only submissive to any domination, but to some extent the people were even respecting domination, so there's this inherent submissiveness. And moving on to the spiritual life, because he also mentioned about the spiritual life in India, he mentioned how spiritual life in India actually bloomed. And in the past, even, I may quote Tagore himself, there was this comparative freedom from so many diverse and conflicting interests. So in the past, there was this high spiritual civilization in which people of different beliefs and different methods of worship, they actually lived side by side. And even high spirituality can still be seen in India. So the problem is not located in the spirituality of the people, but social in the sense that the society was disorganized. The spirituality is there, but the society is disorganized. And what the society is needed is not to reclaim back the spirituality because it's always there, but to organize, to harmonize, and to adapt to this new complex environment. In the past, it was much simpler, but now with more factors inside the society itself, it becomes more complex, and thus it's sort of important to try to organize India and then to try to harmonize with the new influx of factors coming in. And to achieve this, I think Tagore put very strong emphasis on village community, the importance of the village community itself. He mentioned how everything has to be started from the village. There has to be a representative body in which in every province, and then the branches of this representative body should also exist in every village so that information can be collected from the smallest unit of the society. And these people in the village need to be taught on how to meet their own requirements, to be taught about cooperative sustainability and the value of united action. I see this as his way of organizing the village. And he also mentioned how when the village is organized, when the people of the village are capable, then the central unit can be established. But establishing the central unit without organizing the smaller units will be a futile attempt of a whole organization. So it has to be started from the smallest unit first, and then the central unit can be established. However, I think he came across some problems within the society itself when he mentioned this idea. He came across, the first problem was that he realized the masses are actually weak. The general people are weak in the sense that when they come across the higher power, there's always this, what do you call that, oppression and intimidation from the higher power. And returning to the submissiveness and the weakness that it seems like these people cannot see a way out of this relationship of dominant and submissive relationship. And then Tagore tried to advocate the people that they need to be educated. The mass needed to be educated so that they can be strong against the tyrant. In my understanding, I think strength here doesn't necessarily mean the physical strength, but more like the strength of the mind, the strength of the spirituality against the tyrant, so that they would not be inherently submissive in front of this dominant power in front of them. Another thing that Tagore also came across is that he realized with the coming of what do you call that, new age and everything, there is the gap between the masses and the classes, and also the rich and the poor becomes wider. And this didn't happen before. Of course, there was the rich and the poor, but the gap wasn't as wide. But now the gap becomes even much wider, and then cause this harmonization. There's no harmony between, for example, the village and the town. And thus, again, he advocates the importance of making the society into one harmony again. One of the ways by returning to the communal life, to communal society, to bridge the gap between the classes and the masses, the village and the town, and reviving the communal life as a society back. The next one is, he also mentioned that before the problem in India is not spiritual, it's social. And then the next one is the problem in India is not political, it's social. Tagore sort of advocate that it would be futile if India is trying to imitate the West, is trying to imitate the politics of the West, or to borrow the history of the West to be incorporated in India, to build India. And that India has to follow her own destiny. So I was kind of asking myself, so what is India's destiny? He then proceeded to elaborate about Indian history. In the past, when Aryans came to India, Aryans and non-Aryans can live side by side, and even to a certain extent they sort of mingled. But that was before boundaries were sort of made between the Aryans and non-Aryans. And then Muslims came to India, and they also lived in India. They sustained in India for years and years. And he saw that India does not belong to a particular group or a particular race only, but India belonged to everyone there. And that there shouldn't be anyone questioning whether India is actually belonging more to a certain group of people. And if in the past people of different beliefs and races were able to live side by side, then the objective of Indian history is not to set up some other dominance, but to secure a special kind of fulfillment for humanity, a level of perfection that must be a gain for all. And in order to achieve this, all elements must be able to live in unison. If there's one element that cannot live in unison, then they have to be prepared to be cast away or cast aside. Strictly speaking, this unity is not only about the elements inside India, like the Hindu and the Muslims, but the British is also put inside the equation. So unison, in a sense, not only for the Hindu and the Muslims, but also for the British. So everyone there has to live in unison. And Tagore believed that the British existence in India is not of a coincidence, and that it is through the British presence that India sort of learns, knows of wider knowledge, and then also know new discoveries. And he also mentioned some prominent names in Indian history, like Rammohn Roy, who were advocating the unity between India and the West. And he saw that these people were able to bridge the two civilizations, the East and the West, and that their success was due to the fact that they were not overwhelmed by the West civilization. They still held steady of their root of their culture. And the problem of India is that they were overwhelmed by the West splendor, and then sort of like accepted because it was so great, it seemed to be so great and splendid that they accepted everything like beggars. I guess this is where his thought of pauperism came to being. And Because of this unbalanced relationship, tension sort of ensues. And East and West never actually meet because they are actually off different grounds. The failure of the East and the West is partially India's fault too, because the British is not giving their best to India because India was clouded by this passive acquiescence of the superiority of the British. I suppose this is somewhat highlighted in the analogy he mentioned about the boy who asked, why is it that I'm always bullied? It's because you look weak. You seem weak, so that people with power would want to bully you and dominate you more. Thus, in order to sort of escape from this kind of unbalanced relationship between the East and the West, India, first of all, has to shake off its comparisons, should not act like a beggar, and to awaken itself through the suffering in order to be strong, and to not go to the British with bowed heads, but with strong mentality. With this, then the inner fulfillment in India can be achieved, but without this, there's no inner fulfillment, and then the East and the West will never be able to unite, because again, they're off different grounds. However, it is also interesting to note that throughout his writing, we can see that his thoughts were sort of shaped by the current incidents that happened at that time. For example, what happened in Punjab sort of gave him a new perspective or a new angle of the relationship between the British and India. I think he said in one of the letters, he mentioned that it was revealed to our minds the helplessness of our position as British subjects in India. So although he advocated people to be strong in front of the West dominant, but he also see that because of the Punjab incident, in a way the Indians are helpless as the British subjects. And he also mentioned the atmosphere of mutual relationship between India and Great Britain has grown dark with suspicion and suffering. So it becomes even bleaker. The notion of trying to unite the East and the West becomes a bit more bleaker. But even so, I find that he still believes the British must extend its glory in India in a way that it is sort of the British responsibility to do so, to extend its glory to India. However, in the next few letters, he claimed that people started to lose faith in British justice, and that the British are somewhat too preoccupied with keeping up their prestige of power, especially after the incident in Dhaka. With his various thoughts on the British colonization in India, it's also interesting that he doesn't think that the British is inherently bad. Certain occasions that happen in Dhaka and Punjab do not really constitute who or what the British is all about, and thus should not be used to judge the British. Tagore also respect the British people in a comparative sense with all the Western people who came to colonize other races. So I suppose his idea of the problem of India was never about British colonization or the British itself, but the problem with India is actually inherent within India itself. He actually mentioned in his last paragraph that it has to be recognized that there is inevitableness in the fate that has overtaken Hindu in India. We have subdivided ourselves into mincemeat, not to fit to live, but only to be swallowed. Never up to now has our disjointed society been able to ward off any threatening evil. So I assume that when he mentioned the problem of India, it is actually located in its divisiveness and the domination of the lower classes by the upper classes. And this is why he kept on advocating unity beyond that of religion and nationalism, something of higher moral value and merits, and that can only be found in providence. He sort of repeat this idea over and over again. Okay, that was about the problem of India. Another thing that I recognized from when I read this article is because he also mentioned a lot about Mahatma Gandhi. And so I sort of see the relationship between Tagore and Gandhi. Tagore himself mentioned that he does not see eye to eye with Gandhi, in a sense that had he the influence of Gandhi, he would definitely lay out a different scheme with Gandhi. But even though they do not see eye to eye, in my reading of Tagore, I see it's somewhat similarities between his thought and Gandhi's thought too. And I highlight some here. For example, about modern civilization and machinery. To my understanding, Gandhi saw machinery and modern civilization as something evil. It's like the root of evil, and because machinery brings modern civilization and thus bring capitalism in India. And Tagore somewhat had the same thought, because he mentioned how factories and mills bring disharmony to the domestic life, sort of ruin the balance between domestic life, then making the people of the village and go to the city and stuff like that. Although I can see that Tagore doesn't really condemn machinery, doesn't think that machinery or modern civilization is bad in all its costs, unlike Gandhi, who thinks that modern civilization is really, the root of evil. And the second thing is that their sense of freedom, their idea of the British and India is also somewhat similar. Gandhi mentioned how in Hind Swaraj that it is not necessary to ask India to leave, because India will become free when India can rule themselves. And Tagore too in his writing mentioned about this sense of freedom. He mentioned that the real freedom is one of the mind and not the spirit. So the way I see it, both sense of freedom from Tagore and Gandhi does not have external factors or external conditions to it. It's something that comes from within. It doesn't have anything to do with the outside forces. They both also put moral values at high pedestal, and it's something of utmost importance. Moral values is more important than everything else. In his last few letters, I can also see that Tagore claimed his support and trust for Gandhi and his movement, even asking people to join in support for this great man. So I kind of see like maybe the difference between Tagore and Gandhi, this is a simplified version. The difference lies in the means, but not in the ends or the goals. So probably they have different means to reach that, but the ends or the goal is sort of the same. So that's how I see Tagore and Gandhi, but of course it's a simplified version, and there's so much more similarities and differences between Tagore and Gandhi that is beyond my knowledge and my understanding. It is a very short presentation. So I think that's probably concluded all I speak too fast, I'm sorry. I might be wrong in many aspects, so I sort of hope that I can get some enlightenment from Professor Prasad and of course from the rest of you here to give me something of my own limited conception. Thank you.
Okay, that was an excellent presentation. Really actually captured all the most important aspects of the reading. Anybody wants to ask a question or comment on what? Agree, disagree, anything? No? Huh? Oh yeah.
Actually, I want to add something. Your presentation was very nice. Actually, there's very crucial aspects like how both of them treat British. Actually, both of them, they are British educated. British entered India in 1600, in 17th century, when Aurangzeb, as to train the army of Aurangzeb, and they observed how the Indians, the glory of India and everything. They came as traders and also to train the Indian army and everything. So over there, they first observed the religious difference between the Muslims, those who are the rulers, and the non-Muslims, and that means Hindu or Sikh or other people. So and they, at the later stage when they started doing business and trades in Bengal, in 18th century, also there's Islamic rulers from them, they opened the province. So during that time, they used that technique to make it a divide between the society, the civil society. It was not at all observed before. Nobody else never wrote about these things or nothing. Okay, there's a section of these things Hindu and Muslims. Actually, Hindu and Muslims, they live together, but they were antagonistic between them. And because there's same thing, because they were the invaders. Muslims came as invaders and they started ruling the class and everything. So the modern India, you can see the concentration of the Muslims. One is the northeast province, which is at the extent of the Afghanistan, and one is the Bengal. in between the large, maybe a few thousand kilometers, there's not much concentration of Muslims. So, or maybe later, Muslims migrated and like they established their population in Kashmir or in central India in some part. But that is completely different. It's not the same as like Pakistan. Nowadays Pakistan or nowadays Bangladesh. So this happened because of that. And when at a later age, from 19th century onwards, like there was because same thing, Hindu was serving the Muslim rulers when the British came in. So they started serving the British rulers. So for them, actually, this was at the beginning, this was the same. And there are, like, I have books and that showed, like, okay, the Hindus actually from the beginning, they were thinking, even during the 1857 mutiny, there was a separate mutiny, Hindus were there presented in the struggle. But actually it was the last struggle for the Muslim rule to come back in the throne. And that's why it was taken into a vicious part, 1857, when there was an attempt to throw away the British rulers. And that was the end of the company rule, and then the British crown took over India. So that's different aspect. But the thing is like that, before that, it's observed that the Hindu, and many of the Hindus you can see, in that struggle, Sikhs and Gurkhas, the Nepali Hindus. So they supported the British rulers.
But where are you going with that?
No, actually I've been talking about this. No, actually I'm going to somewhere else. So, my point is like that, for them the understanding of the society, it's completely different, like how the Gandhi is seen in a way, and how Tagore is seen.
Yeah, I think we'll probably, because I need the context, to lay down this thoughts, because there's no context. I only relied on what is presented in the materials, and there's no footnotes too, so it's kind of difficult to follow. So
Right,
that kind of context would be very important to further understand both Tagore and Gandhi's thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, so Neela has put before us the central arguments of this, which is, one is this whole question of the emphasis on the social. This is, I think, a theme that will keep returning. That is a choice which was the colonial period in India. One of the most important arguments which divided different leaders of people within the national movement, which divided them, which led to disagreements, is the question of what Tagore puts in very cryptic form as not political but social. So that means there is another group of people who are saying not social but political, right? This is a very crucial kind of difference of opinion, which is, as Tagore again points out, with the Congress coming into existence, and he refers very cryptically, without saying, but it's a clear reference to that moment, which is the moment of Swadeshi, right? Which is what we've already talked about. Swadeshi is, there is a Swadeshi. The Swadeshi has to be looked at as a period just before Gandhi's entry into Indian politics, right? Just before he enters into Indian politics, Swadeshi is a movement in which this division happens between, in that period, between the moderates and the extremists. This again we have looked at in the context of Gandhi, right? Many of these things have come there. What is the difference between these two, and you could on the whole broadly equate moderate and extremist with those who argue for a social change as the need of the hour, and those who argue for a political resolution. This is roughly, you can actually, he mentions, Tagore mentions Ranade. He says in the south, although it's not considered south in today's language, but in Maharashtra, in Bombay, there is this figure called Ranade. There are many others. We saw that all those people whom we looked at when we discussed the middle class, Keshav Chandra Sen and others, right? Vidyasagar and other 19th century figures. So there is another figure who is not often mentioned in the older literature, but who is much more important, whose importance has been more recently recognized, which is Jyotiba Phule. Jyotiba Phule was also a 19th century reformist figure, but he was a figure who, unlike all of these other people whom we have been discussing, whether Keshav Chandra Sen or Rabindranath Tagore or Gandhi or all those Aurobindo Ghosh and all those middle class leaders, and all of them we were discussing. This Jyotiba Phule was from a very socially hierarchical, in the social hierarchy, a very low caste. Flower sellers, right? Phule and his wife, Savitribai Phule, they were extremely active people in the 19th century, were very, very, very innovative kind of interventions in social reform. So they took on the whole caste system, for instance, critique of the caste system, setting up of schools, encouraging the education of girls, which was not considered a good thing in those days, taking on the establishment as far as the Hindu order is concerned, and had a tremendous impact in society. M.G. Ranade, similarly, Tagore here, right? And we will see when we come to Ambedkar, he is also one of those who makes this point. In the Swadeshi, the extremists in the Swadeshi movement, what was their plank? They said, what kind of society we have, what kind of social order we have, whether it is good or bad, this is none of your business. We will take care of it. First we want to get these British out of here. That is the meaning of this in the larger sense, beyond Tagore, there is a theme running through Indian colonial period, the national movement. This kind of argument back and forth between those who said, our society has all these deficiencies, all these defects, all these problems, which we have suddenly realized thanks to the ideas that are coming to us from the West. So in that ambivalence is always there, from Ram Mohan Roy onwards to even Tagore and onwards. The ambivalence is there. That is, these British are doing something unfair and unjust here. But from Europe, again, with the entry of the British, a certain flow of ideas has happened. These ideas have shown us in a mirror the state of our society, the degenerate state of our society. And it has given us reason to pull up our socks and get down to the work of changing this condition, this degenerate condition. And so you also compared it to the past, India's past, where such a, it was not such a bad state, right? But the conditions were not so miserable. You said in the past, but we have lost it, and we have degenerated. Castes have become rigid, and they've live on their own. They have no connection with each other. There is no fellow feeling between one caste and another. They are insular. They look inwards. They don't have any kind of sense of responsibility on a social level, and so on. A series of critiques, starting from the earliest Ram Mohan Roy, Jyotiba Phule, the Vidyasagar, the reformers, the series of reformers in Bengal. Bengal is full of the history of Bengal in the 19th century, because Calcutta was the center of British rule, and so there were innumerable reformist voices that came in that whole century. And also because Bombay was also another big center. So in Bombay also you get, in the Bombay presidency, I mean, in Bombay city, Pune city and other related places, you get another set of such intellectuals, right? And so the argument is that our society's defects have been revealed to us by this advent of this power. This power is oppressing us, but we also realize that it's possible for them to do it because of the nature, condition of our society. And so social reform. So throughout the 19th century and even well into the 20th, and even indeed Gandhi also is part of that consensus, which is that there is something you are arguing for within the British sort of imperial formation. You are not, at that point, nobody is arguing for a separate India. Completely. But the Swadeshi, for the first time, the extremists have introduced this idea of complete elimination of British rule as the only condition, the sole condition for freedom. So this the idea of politics that enters the picture at this point is directly the target of Rabindranath Tagore's criticism. What he is saying is that this approach itself is very damaging, because you have, and what does he point, what is the main exhibit that he puts before you in order to make his point? The caste system, right? He says, the eloquent passages, some of which Neela has read, the passages in which he describes the conditions in India and how feeble people have become, how their minds are feeble, how they are unable to feel anything for beyond the immediate vicinity of their caste kinship relations, how they have no sense of the whole and so on. So the political, the social, right, is the issue here. So well, here is, these are again, in order to keep the continuity with the old present things, I wanted to again show how this kind of iconic transformation, the iconic from the anglicized British influenced Western look, this shift into a kind of guru, very spiritual sort of figure that Tagore adopts. He goes through also some stages. But we saw, with Aurobindo, you have the same Aurobindo Ghosh. I showed you pictures, right, how he is transformed from this anglicized person into a spiritual guru. A very similar kind of transition is going on here also. Now, interestingly, in the 19th century, all of these reformers who were there in the 19th century, you don't find any of them doing this sort of thing. That is, making costume, change, as it were, changing their look. And spirituality is now acquiring a new kind of meaning in the lives of people in the 20th century. That's what is, I think, is important to understand, is that neither, those people, it's not that those people were all wearing Western suits, but whatever they did, they were wearing what was considered in their time appropriate to their particular social class standing. That's all. They which also changed over time. Ramon Roy will have that grand headgear. The others, some wear suits, some wear a combination of traditional Indian clothes combined with a Western coat and so on. Different types of turban and so on. But those were essentially socially defined. That is, defined by the existing prevalent conventions of dressing for different classes. So if they belong to that class, they accordingly they dressed. Jyotiba Phule, very much a very traditional figure, a figure who always was a traditional figure, and you will see, if you see him, he is wearing Indian clothes, very native sort of thing, but not spiritual, not like Aurobindo Ghosh, not like Gandhi, not like Tagore. So there is a kind of interesting shift that can be sort of seen here. What is it about that moment in the 20th century, right, where this kind of internal, it seems that somehow your ideas have to be expressed. First of all, you have to the first point is that we read Partha Chatterjee's essay, right, in which we saw how the more rationalistic, the more spiritual, in the non-religious sense, in the non-conventional religious sense, the Brahmo Samaj, the reformist religions, new spiritualisms that came into existence, they felt that somehow they were not appealing enough to the people, attractive enough to the people. And we remember how in Partha Chatterjee's essay he talks about how they discovered Ramakrishna, this guru, who was a very earthy person who had no heirs, no education, very eccentric, sort of fellow, who spoke a very ordinary kind of rustic language and using proverbs and so on, dressed in a very in this kind of barely just cloth tied around him. It's nothing very much a village kind of mode of dressing. And so there was this extraordinary relation that existed between all these people, middle class people in Calcutta, well dressed, and according to their social standing, going and listening to this half naked person, right, who was discoursing on spirit and giving religious sermon, giving advice about what people should do in their everyday lives and so on. Now, so that duality, right, that spirituality is embodied in one person who is separate from what you are doing in your social life, but it's supplementing, right? So you yourself are not doing that, but you are finding this as somehow it seems to do something, fulfill something, fill a gap which in your own lives you experience. By the time you come to these people, something else is happening. So they are no longer wanting to, obviously they are not wanting to be themselves and have a guru there. They want that guruness to be in themselves, right? They themselves want to represent an amalgam, a blend of the modern, whatever it is, either a blend of the modern and the older, which I would say is something like what Tagore represents, because Tagore's outfit is not something which you can trace back to any Indian source. He is some spirituality which he developed on his own. Right? Gandhi, on the other hand, his attire kept changing in such a way that finally he looked like another Indian peasant. Right? He looked like Ramakrishna, or a slightly different kind of thing. He was actually impersonating a particular kind of Indian native, very rooted kind of personality. And considering that Gandhi was a person who spent his entire youth and early part of his career until the age of 40 plus in South Africa, and with occasional visits to London for education, for legal professional reasons and so on, Gandhi was the outsider compared to like Aurobindo. Aurobindo was an outsider. That is because his father sent him away when he was very young. Tagore was not an outsider in that sense. Tagore was completely a person who, he had a sort of British education, but it was not, he never knew English. Tagore's English is not at all up to the mark. He learnt it, with great effort. He learnt it. Gandhi was equally fluent in English and his own thing. Tagore's English, he himself says it, that his English, he often cannot. In fact, in some of these writings, of course, this is a compilation, but in some of the introductory kind of statements, he says this. He was very much a figure of Bengal. Right? Now you see, the thing about Aurobindo Ghosh and Gandhi is that both Aurobindo Ghosh and Gandhi have been formed by their English sort of relation, acquaintances. They have been formed, and in fact, in this set of writings, one of the interesting things that we find is Tagore, who had a very clear vision about what should be done in India. In the early writings in this selection, the problem of India, the selection. If you look at the early writings before Gandhi comes, so there are three different types of writings in this. We can so there are letters, there are articles, there are speeches, all mixed together by the editor to give an idea of his understanding of India. There are three kinds of writings. One is the writings which are about India before Gandhi came on the scene. The third kind of writing is the writing which what he wrote or what he said after Gandhi was established as a leader. In between, the second one is just one article here, which is a very interesting article, which is about Gandhi, but before he had known much about Gandhi, before the overwhelming importance of Gandhi was too much, he could not. And you can also see the in one of the essays here, he talks about how, well, we have this one supreme leader, one great man. I don't know whether there will be another great man who will come and do something. He is actually saying he wishes that another great man will come. And if you were to read it in a symptomatic psychoanalytic way, one can't help thinking that he is somewhat regretful about his own loss of status in the national domain thanks to this sort of arrival of Gandhi. Because Gandhi is too powerful, there's a sense of overwhelming success that he achieves with this non-cooperation movement. After that, there's nothing you can do but just go along with him and agree or disagree, but on the whole, you have to agree. So this the third phase that I mentioned is where Tagore is genuinely split between admiration for Gandhi and especially the most effusive, the most unqualified admiration for Gandhi is expressed when Gandhi goes on that fast in 1930s for against untouchability. Now you can see how this is a different plank, and Tagore there is happy to acknowledge Gandhi's leadership and to actually think of himself as a worker who will promote Gandhi's the cause for which Gandhi is fasting, which is eradication of untouchability. So that you find here, right? You know, the giving appeals to people in the name, saying our great leader is fasting, let us do something, let us all join together in this struggle. This is completely wholehearted, no unqualified support for Gandhi. In that other part I said, the non-cooperation movement, that time his critique of Gandhi is very harsh, is very sharp, right? He is dismissive, or, in the sense that he, from his own perspective, he sees this entire enterprise as completely destructive, negative, not a good thing, right? And the writings before, when Gandhi was not at all in the picture, are writings in which we get this image of a nation in which, as Neela pointed out, this idea of a center. How should the center come into existence? Right? He has this clear idea that you have to build a center from bottom up. Right? The intellectuals are there, the political leaders are there, they are all in this middle. They are in the middle. That is, they are in their provinces. That's what is important to understand, that as far as Tagore is concerned, India is an idea which has to be built up by these provincial leadership. So he is in the Bengal province. There is somebody else in the Andhra, the Madras province. There is somebody else in the Punjab side. There is somebody else in the Gujarat and Maharashtra side, right? And so on. There are these different provinces, all of which have representation in Congress. Tagore's idea is very concrete idea. It has a fully detailed idea how to do this. He says, first go to the village. The village, you work from the village up, like that. And once you have consolidated provincial unity, right? This province achieves unity, province 2 achieves its unity separately, province 3 achieves its unity separately, and so on. They all achieve their unity in their own places, and then they come together to constitute that center which they have then constituted. You see how the articulation of this whole hierarchy of institutions, village institutions, provincial institutions, and central institution, right? This kind of separation of spheres, articulations, is something that people believed in at that time very strongly, because and indeed there is another thing going on which we must recognize, which is the provinces themselves were being questioned, the geography of the provinces, because the British, what they did was, so if you look at Indian map and how it is internally divided for administrative purposes, it is a completely irrational, completely meaningless kind of thing. So if it's like that, right? Sorry, I mean I can't do. So here is somewhere Calcutta, Bengal presidency, right? Calcutta is the center. Now this Bengal presidency will include this part, and it will come like that, and it will, here somewhere it will be, even UP, parts of UP will be part of it. Bihar, Orissa, and this will also be part of it, and Assam and so on. Now here is somewhere Delhi, right? Now this is Lahore. Lahore is not a presidency, but Lahore has some unity, some unifying thing. It's also a province. Now it has this. Now here is Madras, and here is Bombay. Bombay presidency, Madras presidency.
Bombay also includes Gujarat.
Yeah, no, Bombay, so Bombay Presidency includes Gujarat and Maharashtra, that's fine, it's makes sense. But Bombay Presidency, Madras Presidency, which starts here, includes this part, like that. You know, this region, which, and these people, you know, don't, you know, are always going to Bombay. Their relations are more with that area, because there are two big cities there, Bombay and Pune. But presidency includes this and all kinds of you know things which have no connection. So what these people who think like Tagore, there are many, every province has them. What they are saying is, Tagore himself is not at the forefront of this kind of movement, but those in the other provinces like Andhra, etc., Orissa, even Bengal, you know, after Bengal partition, Bihar and Orissa, in one after the other, they become separate provinces. They are saying linguistic provinces. So you have linguistic provinces, so that means they have some nationality kind of status, and that is where this kind of provincial unity will be achieved, which will then lead to the federal structure, right? That's the idea. I mean, without the linguistic dimension being mentioned, Tagore is actually saying something on those lines. This is important because the center is also something that when Tagore talks about the center here 2 or 3 times in this text, you get this discussion of the center. He is not only giving a new idea, he is also critiquing an old idea, which is the idea on which the Congress is based, the Congress party is based, which is it is the center. The Congress, what is its aim? We are the center. You know, as Aurobindo Ghosh in his critique pointed out in the text which we read, the Congress, you know, all these middle class people from the cities, they think they are the center, they are everything. They say, you know, the people are not part of this, you know, India. You know, India means us only. We are the ones who will, you know, do this work. So this is a crucial kind of thing. Now, what Gandhi did was that he retained the idea of the center in the Congress sense, but he combined it with this new sense of linguistic provinces. So he actually bridged the two, right? And that was, as many historians have said, that is the secret of Gandhi's success as a mobilizer, as an organizer for the Congress, that he said, organize differently. Don't organize in this haphazard way, saying, you know, this city, that city, and so on, without reference to the linguistic provinces. Organize according to linguistic provinces. So in fact, before British could introduce administrative separation of linguistic regions, Congress introduced it in its internal organizational structure. And this idea is what, in a way, you know, Tagore is giving expression to here in those days when Gandhi was not in the picture, right? So in other words, many people were giving and articulating this this need for a kind of reorganization, for a rationalization of you know, separations and divisions and so on, in order to achieve a combination of provincial sort of nationalities as something that is different from what they are now. So it is also a solution to the caste problem. In Tagore's text, it's very clear that how will you solve the caste problem? That is where the going to the village is all about. Going to the village means not somebody from you know, Punjab coming and going to a village in Orissa for you know, that's not. Going to the village means establishing links between the different the strata of one society, right? The intelligentsia, the professionals, and the urban middle class sections having some relation and establishing channels of communication with the villagers, educating the villagers. So in other words, he is giving a very dirigist role, directive role to the educated classes. They will have to educate, because unfortunately, you may remember Gandhi. Gandhi does not think that the people need education, because he says they are already wise, they know everything. We are the ones who don't know, right? That is Gandhi's way of describing. So that's why he says education, this modern education never helped anybody. It's you need some other kind of thing. But here, for Tagore's program, an education in the new values is a vital requirement for change, for attacking the system, the rigidities, the congealed, rigid system of caste. That's what he's directly taking on as a challenge, how to think about caste system and how to address what the difficulties that we have ended up with, and so on, right? Right. Now, another aspect of it is that, again, what Neela quickly mentioned is the question of this: what are the British doing here? Why are they here? This is, what is our attitude towards the British? Tagore's idea seems to be that the British presence in India is a historical necessity. Our society has completely dried up. It's become brittle and is self-destructing. It's going to the dogs, and we need something to rejuvenate. And therefore, providence. He mentions what? Providence. That is God, whatever, something. Fate. Providence has brought the British to our shores so that we may imbibe, they may help us to rebuild our society. You may remember, it's a very unusual term for Tagore to use, and I don't think in later years he would have used it, but at this stage he uses it. He says what we need is bodybuilding. He uses the metaphor of bodybuilding, right? That's why the first point that Neela mentioned, which is India, is the spiritual issue is not important, because Indian spirituality is there, right? So some spiritual leaders are always coming up, and there is no damage to the spiritual question. But that spirit doesn't have a proper place in which to live, because society, which is the body, right? The society in which the spirit can dwell, that society is falling apart. That society is feeble. The society is breaking up. Conflicts are emerging within it. So, saying that spirit needs a vigorous body. So, body building is a metaphor that is, So he says, that is why he says it's not spiritual. Our problem is not spiritual but social. Means we have the spirit, but the spirit has no place to live. It is houseless, homeless. It needs, this body needs to be rejuvenated. That's why you need to build the body, reconstruct. So it's like an organic society has to come into existence by dissolving older social divisions and establishing new social order, which will make, for a dynamic relation between different social orders, different hierarchies. That is, people will come together on some larger basis other than caste, right? So it is only by doing that that the Indian spirit, which is very much alive, can find a home, permanent home. Is the question, is the point that he is making. So this is the first point, right? As far as the British are concerned, it seems that for him their arrival is a welcome event, something to be thankful for, something good that Providence has done for them. But this point is qualified by another statement, which is, it is not a question of imitation. How will this help? So, British can help us rejuvenate our own society. Blanket, he has no doubts about it, that the British coming here is a historical necessity. Our society is in a degenerate state. It needs some inputs, it needs some help, and these are the people who can help us. No doubts about it. On the other hand, no imitation, right? It's not that you imitate and you say you become like England or some other thing. So what is the conception of this help then? What does it mean to say that they are here to help? So there is some conception of a transformation that has to take place, and that can take place with British help, but which does not take the form of imitation. That is simply adopting something from the West. So we have to think about what that might be, right? What he is suggesting. And it seems basically that he is suggesting essentially that it is the help comes in the form of those ideas which enable you to think of new social structures. So here is a new social structure. The nation is a structure. Tagore during the First World War, after his Nobel Prize, and he is touring the world, he goes to America, to Japan and so on, and at that time he gives lectures, and those lectures are a devastating critique of nationalism. Everything, there's a very harsh critique. But in these writings, the nation is the positive element. So the nation is the political form with which you can transform the internal social substance, which is divided by caste, right? Innumerable differences, right? Diversity, right? That it is the nation form with its sense of a new organic sort of combination of peoples, which will enable us, which has to be worked from below, the village. So here it is not about the village. See, again, Gandhi's village and Tagore's village, they are different. Gandhi's village is already sufficient in itself. It has always been a great place. It will always remain the same. Tagore's village is a place from which you have to begin, because it is the smallest unit of a large productive unit. And the village is not celebrated for its being a village, but because it is the place of production, agricultural production, and these are the largest group of people in any province, right? So they, in other words, educated into the modern values, will form that base, on top of which the superstructure called India, the center, will stand firmly. In fact, he uses the terms superstructure and foundation, right? He's saying this superstructure has to come through this reconstitution of the peasant base of India, right? Which is the work of provincial leadership. Provinces have to do that work. So the village is a place which has to be invigorated in order to invigorate the rest of the strata. Right. Yeah. So let us Yeah, I mean, something has to be said about Tagore's importance to India and to Bengal, particularly. Tagore is practically all in all, everything for the Bengali sort of community, right? Everything, as I said, I've made a list of the many things he's done, but this is a very short list actually. There's many more: poet, novelist, playwright, short story writer, songwriter, essayist, music composer, painter, educationist, institution builder. I mean, he did agriculture, innovations in agriculture around his the Shantiniketan in the and so on. I mean, there's any number of things. He also took some initiative to to help to encourage others to collect folk material from around the place and so on. So the numberless differences, as we said. There is this idea, he says, like Gandhi also said, India has a message, a mission in the world, its own destiny to fulfill, a divine purpose also, he calls it. Now this has to be understood in the historical context. There is a very interesting essay by Anthony Appiah on this African-American intellectual called W.E.B. Du Bois. He says, Du Bois and the Illusion of Race. In that article, he discusses something interesting, because in that period, there was this idea which was prevalent all over the world, that there are so many races in the world, and each race has to contribute something to the humanity. So this was one of the ways in which racism was countered, by saying all races have something to contribute. So this idea that what is the contribution, what is the message, or what is the mission of the white race or of the black people of Africa, what is the message of the Indians, and so on. This is a it's a kind, if you like, it's a paradigm which is prevalent in that time. Many intellectuals are using it all over the place. They're talking in terms of races and missions, races and responsibilities, races and destinies, and so on. So it's in that context, I think, that this kind of thing makes sense. And goes on then to critique race and caste, the question of race and caste, where, as I said, those first of all, he says that in some past the caste system served a purpose, but now there is the almost entire absence of any feeling of common interest, any sense of national responsibility in a people, of whom it has seldom been part of their pride, their honor, their dharma, to take thought or stand up for their country. This idea of a country itself is missing from the earlier thing. No country, somebody is ruling somewhere, but you are on your own, right? You don't have a sense of belonging to a particular country. That is what he is trying to say is the need of the hour, and that is what the British can teach, from what you can learn from and implement from the British, is the sense of the national, the idea of a country to which you belong, and the patriotic sort of sense. Right? The regeneration of the Indian people, to my mind, directly and perhaps solely depends upon the removal of this condition. That is, social reform aimed at eradication of caste inequalities is the, and foreign domination. I'm just going over these points again, what we have discussed so far. He says foreign domination is not an excrescence but a symptom of our social disease. That is, because of the social disease that we are suffering from, foreign domination has happened, and it has made us conscious of our own vitality. I mean, it must make us. And then he goes into this question of how India has this, Ashish Nandi has taken this particular aspect of this text, and he has discussed it at length in his book on Tagore. The Illegitimacy of Nationalism, that's the book by Nandi, in which he discusses this particular thing, which is that India has the burden. The race problem is India's special mission. India is the place which will solve the race problem, because India is the place which over the centuries, over the millennia, has acquired this diversity of populations. From all over the place people have come, and they live on their own in separate enclaves, without any relation to each other, and they no longer have a dynamic living culture which combines them, but they are there, and India is now facing this problem. But he wants to also say that by solving its problem, India will provide for the world a way of thinking about solving the problem of races. So it is again obviously a discussion which is happening in the context of a worldwide discussion of the race question, right? Yes, our problem is not spiritual but social, which Neela has already given us. India must acquire the art of bodybuilding, and for this purpose we can avail ourselves of the assistance of the West without falling into imitation, right? Now in this provincial conference, the next thing, one of the next texts, this is where he gives these ideas for how to reconstruct India, right? And look at the comprehensiveness: industry, education, and community building, right? You have to work upward from each and every district to a representative body. Provincial conferences should establish branch organizations in every village, collect information about every province, every part of the province, combine villages to form regional units, strive for self-reliance at this level, set up own schools, workshops, granaries, cooperative stores and banks. It's a very detailed plan. This is an amazing kind of proposal. A common meeting place for work and play, a method for settling disputes. This is a text from 1908, right? It's very early in the scheme of things. Landowner and tiller must make common cause. That is, they must come together. Labor saving appliances. Now here, this positive attitude to machinery. The negative, as Neela pointed out, there is both a positive and a negative sort of commentaries on machinery. Much of it is positive, but there is a negative side which will come later. The positive is India needs to these labor saving appliances which can be used, but the thing is the labor saving appliances are very costly. You can't, individual farmers in India cannot afford them. But he says if you collectively buy them, they are affordable and they will save labor, they will make life easier. And he talks about how sugar mill, you can have a sugar mill for an entire region. All of these people will use this for their sugar. Jute press, animal husbandry, power looms, right? But where is the negative point? The negative point is that factory labor, that is labor in a capitalist conditions, that is the deadening, alienating labor which he is opposing. So it's actually a kind of critique of capitalism rather than a critique of technology or machinery, right? Machinery is not being denounced, but the use of machinery in factories by capitalist entrepreneurs is what he is opposing, right? Center, a province is organized in this way and a central unit will then come into existence, which will be the real heart of India. Until then, a central organization can have no meaning. That is, unless this work at the base is done, there is no meaning to such a the idea of a center. It's a direct critique of the existing Congress establishment. That's why the next quotation here: how can the Congress have the authority and the strength to demand a share in the administration of the country if it is not moved by the urge of national work and remains a platform for raising weak complaints and offering irresponsible advice, right? and the state of the village community is the mother of nations. That means he is seeing it as the cell. Each village is like a cell in the organic formation called the nation, right? You can see that these are ideas about nationalism, which is Mazzini, various sources he is drawing. Gift of strength, city and village. Yes, and our real problem in India is not political, it is social. And the constitution of a Swadeshi Samaj. Swadeshi Samaj means Swadeshi society. That is, and here, that is one point which was brought out in the presentation. He says, this, who are you or me or anybody to say this belongs to us? Belongs to who? By what right? Right? And this Tagore's universalism comes across very strongly here. He says this is nobody's personal private property. किसी का as they say in Indian in Hindi, किसी का बाप का माल नहीं है. Nobody's father's property. You cannot say this is mine. And he doesn't even say it's only Hindus and Muslims have equal share. He even says the British, who are you to say they can't live here? By what right? How does it belong to you? Because if it belongs to me, then I can say the British don't belong here. But how does it belong to you? That's the fundamental question he is posing here. You can see that Tagore's ideas about later ideas about civilization, where he denounces nationalism, comes from this kind of universalism, where he is trying to say that India has to somehow provide a new way of constituting a polity which will serve as a model for us to think beyond the nation. So in a way, it's not that nation is in its historical place. It's not that he is refusing to see its positive values. He is seeing that, but he says you need something more, some other kind of thing, in order to take care of the particular kind of social character that India is has, right? And so who is this we anyway, he says, and who are we to say that this country is ours alone, right? Any attack on those who fall back on the infallible wisdom of the Vedas. He says that Vedas, this is an attack on the Hindu nationalist sort of extremists that Tilak and others and so on. He says if the Vedas are already said everything, why do such people want to live? Finished, it's all over. So there's nothing left, nothing new can ever come. So you might as well die. Only the larger we, that is Hindu, Muslim, British, whoever else there be, must eventually unite, shall have the right to determine what is India and what is of the outside. And then the passage about Ram Mohan Roy and the Congress. Yeah, this is this letter to Amir Chakravarti is also where he expresses his misgivings about Gandhi, but he says, but Gandhi has every right to insist on people following his path because he has shown that he can be successful in leading the people in the non-cooperation movement. But another thing I want to point out is how about the Congress. He says, this is what the Congress has done. It has dragged the provinces of India out on the highway of a common political freedom, and its internal discords are thereupon becoming apparent at every step. That is, the provinces have not gone through this revamping, restructuring which he is proposing, but in the Congress is pulling the provinces into the national platform, central. But they come there and start fighting among themselves. So the center is only a place where fighting happens between provinces. So that's why he is saying, this cannot be done in this fashion. You can't put the center before the province. You have to make the provinces come together and form a center. My scheme of work would have been different. He says, I don't agree with Mahatma Ji because I would have done it differently. but I don't have the power. This is where you can see that slight envy and slight sense that he's lost his, that he could have done better, and that this, but there is no hope. And then Subhash Chandra Bose, a critique of British, sort of attitudes and Western civilization insofar as it is a capitalist thing. And he makes this East-West thing, he gives it a concrete form. He says, the West is continually producing mechanical power in excess of its spiritual control. And India is producing the system of mechanical control in excess of its vitality. That is, Indian social structure is killing the spirit because it's too rigid. Right. So the whole history of Swadeshi, the moderates and the extremists and so on, which we have just discussed. And again, a critique of Gandhi, where he says that what we need to do is reconstruction of building the nation. We are doing voluntary work. Self-government lies at our very door waiting for us. He says you just have to do self-government means go do the work that of reconstruction. Our education is the thing which we should first of all take into our own hands. We can very well do it. You can start your own colleges and your schools and educate the people. Nobody is going to stop you because already some have started, but that's the work. On the question of the charkha, he is this is where he is most bitter in his critique of Gandhi. Right? Our countrymen are now under the impression that Swaraj can be easily achieved. The prospect of a fakir turning a copper coin into a gold mohar, this is what is. Because Gandhi in those days is saying within 1 year we'll get Swaraj, because the non-cooperation movement is built on that basis, right? And he is critiqued for that by many people, and he has actually an answer. There is at the end of this text I have put Gandhi's response to Tagore, which is we'll just in terms of following the differences between Tagore and Gandhi on various issues, this one moment in the aftermath of non-cooperation, which is in 1920, 21, etc., where he is writing this critique of Gandhi, this part that is up on the screen, where the charkha, he particularly picks up this whole idea of the charkha, that if you Gandhi actually says that if everybody starts spinning their own cotton thread and making their own cloth, India will be free within a few months, that kind of a thing. So his one of the points he makes is reliance on one or two narrow paths as the sole means of gaining a vast realization, that is like independence. Among those paths prominently looks the charkha. And then he makes another comment on the charkha. He says if charkha is the means of attaining Swaraj, then Swaraj is an external attainment. So he is actually directly responding to Gandhi's idea that Swaraj has to be internal, saying if it has to be internal, then how does the charkha, which is obviously an external sort of instrument.
What is the real meaning of charkha?
Charkha is the wheel, spinning wheel. The idea that Gandhi's idea that everybody spins cotton by themselves, hand thing. You will get Swaraj. So that is the point of this comment. And continuing on those lines, he says, and therein lies the reason why, when the defects of character and the perversions of social custom which obstruct its realization are kept out of sight, and whole attention is concentrated on homespun thread, that's the spinning wheel, no surprise is felt but rather relief. That is, this idea appeals to people. They say, oh, you can just spin some cotton and you will be free. So it actually ends up being an external instrument which is used to the idea that if you do that you are free, and therefore there is a complete sort of falling back on that without thinking about the perversions of social custom, that is caste and other things, etc. So this is Tagore's critique of Gandhi. But as I also said, in 1930, when Gandhi goes on a fast against the practice of untouchability, again as a gesture it is a very it fails, because just because Gandhi is fasting, the people don't give up untouchability. Untouchability continues even to this day, but he was trying something, and Rabindranath Tagore is fully and wholeheartedly behind this move. He tries to say, okay, this is a moment, the great, Mahatma has given us a call, let's do something. He puts his best effort into trying to make that happen. And yes, there is a comparison of British Empire with the Soviet Union. It says that if the empire was actually an undivided body politic, that is, if everybody in the empire were the same, equal, then he says there is no problem with the empire. The only problem is that in the empire, different people have different status. The English, are superior, the Indians are inferior, somebody else is even more inferior, and so on. And whereas then he takes Soviet Union as an example to say that it's there the empire, the nationalities have internal autonomy. Now I want to just quickly end this so that we can have a discussion by just giving you a glimpse into Gandhi's response to Tagore. This is a response directly to some of the comments that we have already read. Here is this thing, I just read it. The poet of Asia, as Lord Hardinge called Dr. Tagore, is fast becoming, if he has not already become, the poet of the world. Increasing prestige has brought to him increasing responsibility. His greatest service to India must be his poetic interpretation of India's message to the world. The poet is therefore sincerely anxious that India should deliver no false or feeble message in her name, and so on. Then he says he says he has striven hard to find himself in tune with the present movement, that is non-cooperation movement. He says he is baffled. He can find nothing for his lyre in the din and bustle of non-cooperation. He has written some letters in which he has endeavored to give expression to his misgivings, and he concludes that non-cooperation is not dignified enough for the India of his vision. That is a doctrine of negation and despair. That it is a doctrine of separation, exclusiveness, narrowness and negation. So in the next paragraph he says, in all humility I will endeavour to answer the poet's doubts. I may fail to convince him or the reader, but I would like to assure him and India that non-cooperation is not any of the things he fears, and he need have no cause to be ashamed of his country for having adopted non-cooperation. If in actual application if it appears to have failed, it will be no more the fault of the doctrine than it would be of truth. That is, if non-cooperation fails, it's not that there is a problem with the idea. It fails because, as he said, Indians are not ready for it. Right? Non-cooperation, I am going down, is a protest against an unwitting and unwilling participation in evil. The poet is concerned with students. He is of opinion that they should not have been called upon to give up government schools, etc. And again Gandhi makes another critique of education. He says, this literary education is of no use. He says, my experience has proved that literary training by itself adds not an inch to one's moral height, and that character building is independent of literary training. So formal education in his view is of no use. These schools have unmanned us, made us helpless and godless. Right? Now going down, He says in the next page of this thing, correspondents have written to me asking me not to commit suicide. This is because Gandhi had said that if this doesn't work and nothing happens, we don't get Swaraj, I think my life is over. You know, he says a metaphorical statement which some people thought he was actually going to end his life. And further down, Swaraj does consist in the change of government and its real control by the people, but that would be merely form. The substance that I am hankering after is a definite acceptance of the means and therefore a real change of heart on the part of the people. I am certain that it does not require ages for Hindus to discard the error of untouchability, for Hindus and Muslims to shed enmity and accept friendship as heart friendship as an eternal factor of national life. For all to adopt the charkha as the only universal means of attaining India's economic salvation, and finally for all to believe that India's freedom lies only through non-violence and no other method. Right? And then he says, for instance, on the contrary, I have never felt so sanguine as I do at the time of writing that we shall gain the substance during this year. He is saying, he is still thinking that in this year Swaraj will be attained. Tagore's critique of that was that he says, you know, Gandhi said at the end of, when the Chauri Chaura incident happened, when the police constables were put in a police station and burnt by the agitators, right, which we looked at in the Gandhi last time. And Gandhi called off the non-cooperation movement, saying Indians are not ready for freedom. They are immature and they need to be educated. So Tagore's point is that is the whole point, is that if that is the case, then my social reconstruction program is what is needed. That's Tagore's point. That on the one hand you are saying they are not ready, but on the other hand you keep doing these kinds of political programs. Again, the politics takes over. You don't actually say that, okay, we are not ready, and actually give up these kinds of political actions which end up with those kinds of violence, and go and educate the people. And the education, the actual education which Rabindranath Tagore thinks is necessary, which is that education out of superstition, out of all kinds of caste-based prejudices and so on, into a modern sensibility. Right? He says only then can the people be ready to struggle for independence. So he's saying, you are saying it after the fact, but it was obvious from the beginning that that is the case. So if you really understand the state of India today, then you know that these people, the people that we have, with all the kind of prejudices, the separation, the divisions, the mutual suspicion, etc., they can't get together and agitate for freedom. On what basis? They don't have. That is your diagnosis. His diagnosis is they can't, they are not united, they are not a country, they are not a people who have an internal cohesion. So Tagore in that context makes the point that you have to begin with that realization and work to change that. So in that sense, for him, non-cooperation is a big mistake. Okay, so we can talk about these differences, and I think the main point is that the political program and Tagore's relation to that political program, and how in his own emphasis it's all about he is most enthusiastic about Gandhi when Gandhi undertakes social programs, programs for social transformation, and least in agreement when the programs are all about political demands for immediate freedom and so on, right? Because he feels that immediate freedom means the same people will rule, and the people, the masses will remain in the same state of ignorance and in dividedness. So that is about Tagore and his. Tagore was a very internationally known figure. After his Nobel Prize, he became, he traveled, and widely. He had meetings with all the great figures of world, of his time. One of the intriguing things about Tagore is the spiritualism, which he had a very concrete social sort of, he didn't think that spirit was a problem, right? We saw how not spiritual problem but social. And yet in his own life he seems to have moved more and more towards this kind of spiritual, as we saw in the picture, but even in the writing, towards a certain kind of emphasis on the spiritual dimension. Yeah, so that is one aspect that is something, that intriguing.
Can you say something more about the spiritual side? It's obviously, what is it?
The Tagore spiritual side. It is not, it doesn't have any particular denominational character. You can't trace it to some this or that religious source or anything like that. It's a God which is very much a idea. It's a spirituality devoid of any kind of concrete rituals or anything like that. It's a kind of one of the sources. I mean, as many people have said, the religions, the more reformist kind of religious practices, such as Christianity or Buddhism, etc., were certainly there in the background, in terms of his spiritual training, his own. But there was also the kind of bhakti religion of India. Bhakti is a form of unity with God, on a personal level, emphasis on personal, which means that you discard all these institutional forms, the temples, all these rituals and all that, and you have a more, very much like a Protestant idea of spirituality, which has to do with direct thing. And in Bengal, there is a very prominent movement of Bauls. The Bauls are a kind of syncretic, mystical, religious kind of spiritual kind of outfit. Bauls are extremely good singers. They have some beautiful music, Baul music, which is very popular even now in Bengal. Baul, that is the, and their doctrine is a combination of Sufi and Bhakti sort of things, Hindu, Muslim, it has a syncretic quality to it, and they have their own standard metaphors and so on, and obviously it is a very popular thing in Bengal. And there are still Bauls who, they generally tend to be homeless, wandering around, begging, singing in the streets, singing all over, and so on. And they have their own settlements, so they don't have homes, but they kind of live together in groups, in camps, and so on. So that is one possible source. But even so, he doesn't have even those kinds of concrete ideas that the Bauls have. So it's a spirituality, and I feel this spirituality in some ways has to do with this idea of India and its message. It seems that there is a great pressure of European expectations, the desire of the other, as it were, So it's like you are reconstituting yourself in, in keeping with the desire of the other, because there is this tremendous kind of people say that this East-West dichotomy is something Indians invented. Actually, it's not. It's invented by the European, and in some peculiar way it is internalized by the colonized Indian in some way. So I mean I'm not saying that is is adequate explanation, but it seems that is one factor. There is in a way you are responding to what is actually a reading of you presented by thing. I don't know.
Professor, last time or possibly even before, you mentioned that before the British came to India, before the Islamic, India was a place where the Muslim rules and the Hindu leads. But seems to me not only from him but even from Gandhi, they have a kind of nostalgia to the old India or before or pre-colonial India.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether it was really kind of symbiotic and harmonious society, or whether it's just there's I don't know, imagination,
Yeah.
or whether it was part of their strategy how to unify the Muslims,
Yeah.
against the British.
Yeah. See, it's one dimension to it is that in Tagore it's very clear, in other writings, even Gandhi says it, which is that in the old conquerors, so from India, as Tagore puts it, from the Aryans, that is from 3,000 years before, to the Muslim Mughals and other Muslim rulers, people came and stayed. That is, they belonged here. They just became part of it. That is, the difference in British rule is that the British are ruling this country, but their country is elsewhere. That's one difference that they think makes a difference. That the British are not actually saying, we are here, we are living here, we are ruling, like a Mughals, we are also rule, but we are essentially here. Their connection, they are natives of Britain, they are citizens of Britain, and they are coming here as like a job, taking a job to rule, in India. So that is the nature of modern colonialism. That it's not that kind, settler colonialism, it's a kind of, management colonialism, managerial kind of colonial order, where you manage it, you take profits and you take it back, and so on, just siphoning kind of thing. The second point is that obviously not. India, the Indian village was not some harmonious thing as Gandhi or Tagore. I think Tagore is not, Gandhi in fact, he says, I just read it in that magazine that, he's saying the India of my ideal is not in existence now, but it used to exist then. But it's pure construction. He's saying it's what he is basically saying is that they used to be self-sufficient in the sense that in India, village life was not greatly affected on an everyday basis by the larger political structure. They were not integrated like that. They tended to be work on their own. And there was a horizontal networking of business related sort of things, and kinship and religion and trade and so on. They were there. But those were on the basis of products from here going there, or something from there coming here, or you going and so on. Otherwise, socially, it was not, they were, so it was a stagnant community, in other words, that's also a way to put it. And indeed, Gandhi, in fact, puts it like that, although he thinks that stagnation is a sign of strength. In Hind Swaraj, he says India has nothing new to learn, therefore for thousands of years we've had the same plough, the same village structure and so on. But for him that's a positive thing. Now Tagore on the other hand, what he is saying is, he is trying to give some kind of rationalization, justification for old caste system in the old days. It had a function, but it's not the main thrust of his argument. His main thrust is, now it's degenerate, it needs to be rejuvenated, it needs to be reconstructed. You need to destroy the old and reconstruct. So in that sense Tagore is less invested in glorifying the past. Gandhi is also not glorifying the past, but he is wanting to somehow recover the village, the Indian village as a type, in order for into the modern, and therefore he romanticizes it a little. Yeah, no, definitely it is.
Say more things, I think at least on this point, the notion of village is shared by both
Yeah.
these two guys, Gandhi and Tagore. And one obvious question is, they actually think this is the basis for whatever, the movement, for national unity, or for the reform.
Yeah.
Because if you try to imagine the country's situation, the one issue obvious need to be analyzed is how did the British ruling at that time operate on which level? Because one would imagine it would operate mainly in the larger city. Could they touch the village?
Mm.
Right? That's one. So what is the relation between village and all the city you name?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And one would not be able to imagine the British ruling was able to penetrate, so to speak, all to that level, and so on and so forth. And so what is the relation between the city in actual, historical, which gives them a hope? This is where things are need to sort of not yet touched.
Right. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
What was the consensus or how people imagine in relation with the British ruling?
Yeah. See, it's not entirely true to say that the village was not touched. Meaning that the white presence is not there.
Right.
But the British administration, the police, the bureaucracy, etc., has different layers, and they go all the way down to local things. Yeah, village level in the sense the taluka, which is a cluster of, a small town which administers the village, sort of system and so on. So they are present, but they and another thing is that once the courts are established, the legal system is established, all kinds of litigation starts. People used to have dispute resolving mechanisms in the village, which was what is called the panchayat system. There are some elders in the village who would sit on judgment and they would pass the judgment. So if you had any dispute with your neighbor, you go to the panchayat. Panchayat is in the village itself. So there is a big tree, under the tree they all sit and they hear the case and they say, But when the courts were established, people started going there. Right? So in that way this system got sort of destabilized. It sort of started breaking up. So in that sense the villages get drawn into that system through the establishment of British institutions of governance, courts, police, revenue systems and so on. These are all penetrating the entire subcontinent. But in spite of that, social life remains largely unaffected. That's the thing. So property related issues we can go to the court. People go to the court because see the panchayat may rule, but in the old days there was only the panchayat. So whatever the judgment the panchayat gave, you took it. But the one who loses in the panchayat says there is another avenue, the court. So the loser will definitely want to try again to win, right? So when you have an option, you will go there. This is how the whole thing operates, right? So the existence of an option for the loser in a panchayat is means that you get dragged. So in that way, rural life gets affected by these kinds of things. And the zamindars, for instance, the zamindari was established by the British, and the zamindars were responsible for tax collection, payments, giving tax and so on, various duties, which made them actually points, nodes in the British government, system. So, government was, for instance, if a zamindari, there was no heir, so the whole zamindar, the whole land of the landlord could be taken by the British, because there was nobody to inherit the land. So they would have to do something, they would have to put somebody in place, adopt a son or something like that to avoid losing the land. And then the British government would dispute it. They say, no, you can't do this, and so on. So in that way, all kinds of ways in which villages were very much drawn into rural life. So I'm not saying the village as a unit, the village as a social unit remains substantially, retains its certain character in spite of all these changes. But as people living in a larger, British India, everybody in some way is drawn into the large things.
Can we stay a little bit longer here on the level of the village? Because in Vietnam, what actually damaged the village's communal life was actually the tax system. Because before the French came to Vietnam, the tax was collected by those elders in the village. When the French came, they let the already existing power or the structure of power to continue, but they directly extract the taxes and they require quarry. How it's functioning in India? Because finally, before that, just the village have to collect a certain sum of money as a tax. But after the French came, there was a tax from ahead. That's already leads to the derivation of the system. Another question was the corby. If you have to choose someone for the courts, the labor court, of course, it will be like the village system. So.
No, India had there was no single rule for all of India. Every place had its, because India was conquered and, brought under British administration in stages, right? So the the initial moves were made in the Bengal region, which was establishing these permanent settlements. So zamindars were permanently, set as the owners, with a certain ownership, with some obligations to the British in terms of payments, etc. But so they became like rajas, so all the villages within their thing, the tenants were like their praja, that is subjects of a king or something like that. It was a very, huge, large-sized land holdings and so on. But elsewhere, it's not the same. There are, regions in India where you just have the small farmers or middle-sized farms and so on. And tax collection is of a different kind where, government-appointed officials collect taxes from everybody and so on. So it differs from place to place. And then there was also the princely states, which are these nominally kingdoms, independent kingdoms, which had some, again, the king would have some obligations and some relation where supervisory presence of the British would be there. So British presence would be there, but nominally, symbolically, a king would be ruling the country, that sort of arrangement. Which, well, in spite of it being nominal, there were some significant differences between those kingdoms and British India, some positive, some negative, and so on. So it's very diverse, depending on region. You can't really...
Tagore says that the unrest provoked by foreigners, specifically the British, was a good sign. And because India was degenerated and needed to...
yeah.
I can understand his point. But then when he says we have to reconstruct it not by imitation, then how? Because so far as I understand, I think his plans for reconstruction, this idea of city and village and network, it's very much British or Western. And
Yeah,
of
so
course I can see that he has adjusted it a little bit. And when India is confronted with the Western industrialization, the whole idea of a mechanical age, that's a very Western idea.
Yeah. See, my sense of it is, I don't know, I don't have an answer in terms of what it means. I know there's no sort of set thing to be said about it. My sense of it is, when he says no imitation, what he means is the form, is to be adopted. That is, there's a new kind of society in which there are those older divisions cannot prevail. Caste division cannot prevail. Caste has to go. So in this new kind of system, these relations between the rural, the country and the city and the province as a whole and its relation to the center, these are all what he is trying to say. So at the province level is where I feel he thinks that the province will have all those qualities that are ascribed to the nation state. Nation. Internal cohesion. That is, internal society will not be divided by caste. It will, obviously he is not proposing, a communistic sort of idea, but so in other words, there will be some kind of economic divisions will be there. But I think the model is the nation. So in that sense, it's it's Western, as you said, right? But on the other hand, what he's saying by that is, it is not that you don't have to pursue this that model at the level of the substance. So in other words, you don't have to have the same holidays as they have. For instance, we were talking earlier in Shantiniketan, the weekly holiday is in the middle of the week. It's on a Wednesday, because it's something to do with local conditions, right? So you do what suits you according to local situations. Your clothes you need not imitate the West in terms of clothes. You don't have to eat the things they do or do the things that they consider to be good things and so on. In the sense that, so it's a kind of distinction in my reading between a formal transformation, which makes Indian social conditions more consonant with the social conditions of Western political units, but without that level of, because that is happening to a great extent in India, right? That is the social limitation, people wearing suits in order to look like British people, hats, and speaking English in that like in fact in India they say, in England they say that the last true Englishman, he says in England there are no true Englishmen anymore because they all changed, but the last true Englishman is in India. So that kind of thing, that is imitation, I think, that kind of, it's that that he is referring to, right?
Page 276, I don't know whether this is actually a larger question, not only for India, for any colony.
Yeah.
Or 276, almost get to the heading, in the middle paragraph. For the conclusion, Europe
has her past.
Europe's strength therefore lies in her history. We in India may make up our mind, and we cannot borrow other people's history. And that if we stifle our own, we're committing suicide.
Yes.
When you borrow things that do not belong to your life, they only serve to crush your life. So this is something like along the similar line of the so-called imitation. But actually, I think Tagore himself, as you read here and there, he's actually trying to implement. For instance, he's practicing a different theater form, right? How theater as a Western form. And in the beginning, he tried to say this is what we can do, but there's something else more we can do.
Yeah.
But it's more complicated than let's put in Indian component, right? It's a little bit like his own transformation of the dress.
It's a kind of assimilation. That is, from a position of strength, you can assimilate. You can take, like anybody, I am independent, right? But I can listen to you and take your ideas and think about them and adopt them if I want to. It doesn't constitute imitation, because I am doing it from a position of autonomy, right? I am not doing it in order to become like you.
But assimilation can be understood. Who assimilate who?
No, but I am saying in this way. You are from your own subjectivity, receiving in full cognizance that you are receiving.
So in that sense, you learn something with already on the ground there is a subjectivity. So in reality cannot be, if by imitation we mean copy, cannot be copied.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense this is their form, put it here. But how do you, in a way people want to say localize.
But that's also not quite it. Yeah, you're right. That's not quite it. See, this is a paradox. First of all, to become that autonomous subject who can take whatever they want according to their autonomous recognition of need, you have to take the help of the West. That is the historical problem. That is, you are not now in that position where you can choose and select and adopt according to your need. Because of your state, you don't have that autonomy. So that is where the help of the West, the historical duty or thing of the West is coming in. But the danger is that the West can serve not as some kind of a help to develop your own autonomy, but that it will serve as a model for you to simply follow and try and become a part of by imitation. Right? In the same thing, so the same thing is a source of potential positive movement and danger of imitation as the thing. I think that's.
Isn't he referring to something that can be called a common historical experience of a group of people that actually doesn't exist in India?
Yeah, exactly.
It never can function there.
But that's what he is saying. You must now try to develop is a commonality Yeah.
And then let me try to lay out different, how can I say, certain position I know of as a sort of reference point for comparison. Because one strength of nationalist thought is trying to suggest that it's very, very difficult practice because it's anti-imperialism at the same time anti-feudalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So in the sense, the West you cannot imitate,
Yeah.
and the feudal form or tradition you cannot imitate.
Yes.
Right? So almost become like you need to, it's like a Blade Runner. You nothing to stand on, right? Because almost nothing you can, so what do you do? So there's one strand of the position. There's also one strand is the nativist position, is return to the
roots.
Take whatever Hinduism as the form.
Yeah.
We can modernize it.
Yeah.
Right? And so on and so forth. And there is also, of course, the Westernization school. Let's just forget about it. This is impossible.
Yeah.
To hold, right? So let's assimilate the West, become the West, right? And all these different stands. You can compare within the colonial whatever condition in relation to subjectivity or to the strategy trying to develop. So in relation to this, where do we place Gandhi and Tagore? And they seem to be very, very different. Somehow you cannot quite put your finger on, in terms of his position. But Tagore seemed to, how should I say? Tagore has some sort of vantage point in the sense he's recognized through whatever Nobel Prize.
Right, yeah.
So he has already built up his own subjectivity.
Yeah.
And my hashtag, in a way, like last time when we talked about Gandhi, and he travels around, and people would expect Tagore to be different from the Westerner.
Yeah.
Right? But he, in certain way, already part of it. And so you need to assert a different kind of subjectivity to be Indian.
Right.
Otherwise, if you... So this is the kind of, I don't know, Gandhi perform sort of embody a different kind of image.
Right.
But I'm sorry for some of us actually looking at Tagore's picture. It's not guru. It's a little bit like Jesus-like. Right? Has certain Western take. But it's not the kind of Indian.
No, it's not Indian. Yeah, that's what I was also.
We could imagine.
Yeah. It's a spiritual, but not Indian in any recognizable way. Yeah, that's what I was also. Whereas Gandhi's outfit, which he finally picked, that is meant to actually denote a very rural Indian sort of, that's the iconic significance of it.
So in some way,
not Tagore,
if you lay out all these sort of different positions or different theoretical possibility, Tagore seemed to stand for, I don't want to say this, but a little bit like this, some sort of free spirit.
No, absolutely. I mean, the free spirit is the term which comes to mind with Tagore. You're right.
No, it is in the sense that he's trying to express coming out that way. Right? He's a moderate figure.
Yeah.
If he's a hardcore anti-colonial figure, he won't be given the Nobel Prize, for instance, or recognized in the
Right, yeah, this is true.
and so on. But he's not only moderate in that sense, but he's also very different from later on we call the postmodern type or anything goes. There is certain principle for taking things in.
Yeah, so he does, yeah, it's a liberal position, a position which, I mean, for instance, he says here, courtesy is a sign of freedom. You know, to show courtesy to the other means that you are free. Unless you are free, you can't be courteous to to another person. Something, very, so at that level he's talking about, a modern subjectivity which, characterized by autonomy, which alone is capable of, interacting on an equal basis with the other, whoever they may be. That sort of thing is very much, strongly present there. And that's where this whole business of, the inability, that he cannot conceive this kind of Indian nationalism which is based on exclusion, exclusive sort of, identifying this set of people as the ones who must, who own the country or who, who belong more than others and so on. So it's, and also there's a question of the society, building a society. So is a acute consciousness of the lack of something called society actually. There are people, but there is some new understanding of society. So India never has not had a society and it still doesn't have a society. So without a society, society means a larger entity, not the small group, one caste, one village thing, but a larger entity in which the component parts, that is the individuals, are all, in some ways symbolically defined as members.
So this sense of society is defined according to Western civilization because it's cross-caste.
Yeah.
Because it seems that we can't really say that there wasn't the sense of society existed before, because despite of the fact that it's caste divided, it's another sort of society. So Tagore here is sort of importing the Western society, and also the concept of subjectivity and autonomy is also very much a Western one, isn't it?
I mean, he doesn't use subjectivity and autonomy. I'm just describing it like that. Those terms he doesn't use.
But it seems to me that when he emphasized the needs of education, sort of consciousness or personal consciousness, self-consciousness, awareness, then all these ideas did not exist.
No, they are all new. You see, that is why, I mean, there is no doubt at all. He is saying we need the help that the West can give us. We need, they have come here and its providence has brought them here in order to help us to change our existing conditions. So there is he is not denying in any way that that is how it is. It's like a recognition, the mirror. The West holds up a mirror in which you see your own image and you see that you are crushed, broken, feeble, right?
My problem with it is more that when I think about it in comparison with traditional Chinese or Taiwanese society, before the arrival of Western civilization or before the arrival of Enlightenment ideas, we really didn't quite have the sense of, individuals.
Yeah, nobody had. I mean, even the West didn't have individual before Enlightenment, right? Yeah, true. So, but that's the thing. So that is why you are recognizing that, I mean, it's not, for you, what is it? Yes, a moment of change. a moment when you need to change. These are good ideas. This is throughout the 19th century. All the intellectuals of Bengal, that's what they are saying, or Bengal or Bombay Presidency or whatever. They are saying these are new good ideas. We have to learn to transform ourselves in the light of these ideas. And by doing so, we will be able to resist British oppression. That's that's the cycle. So yeah, it's new, very much new. There's absolutely no question of individualism or sense of autonomy, etc. prior to the British rule. So you can see that like the one, I think the first class or second class, we were discussing this whole question of humiliation and shame and so on. You can see that is very much figuring here, although the language doesn't reflect it in the direct way. But this idea that there is a shameful condition in which we are at present, and there is a way out of it to change, and so on. But it's a paradox. It's the idea that what does it mean that you become like them? So this is the intellectual question. Is it how to change, by becoming Western or by some other route? This is the it remains a dilemma. Seems.
So it will be in every corner you turn, there will be a moment of reconciliation or making decisions.
Yes, to be this or that. I mean, is this what I'm doing? By doing something, am I trying to become like the West, or am I trying to use the new Western ideas in order to become something else that that is potentially inside me, something like that. This is I would think of it as an attempt to articulate the imponderables of the situation, the difficulties, the truly irresolvable character of the situation. So different people are trying to articulate it in different ways, and so in that sense the difference between what Tagore is asking us to do and what he is warning against doing, it's not a very clear difference. It's not like you understand right away what this means and what that means, but it's the conceptual struggle to say, take the help but don't imitate. It's not self-evident what that distinction is, but
It seems to me that we have to add one more dimension. I believe that those people were also looking for the reason why the British was able to conquer those countries.
Yeah.
So they was also looking for the mistake from the past.
Yes.
And that's actually is also another point that we have to consider if we are analyzing the problem. It's not just about to be like them or transform the West ideas to something that is more suitable to us or whatever, but also to learn from the past. We were speaking about the individualism and the communitarism. So of course that was one of the main debates, right? So I don't know. Seems to me that we also have to think about this sentiment in the dimension.
No, that's true. That is definitely features in this writing. That is, how did they manage to conquer? Gandhi also talks about it. Tagore also talks about it. It's inherent to us. The problem is inherent. That's again the solution. The conclusion is that Gandhi is very clear. It's not because they conquer. It's we who allowed ourselves to be enslaved. because of our enfeebled state. Same Tagore. In terms of diagnosis on that question, it is the same. But today you have the condition that thanks to that feeble character, you have become enslaved, and now you have to find a way out. Right? So that's where the other options come in. So yeah, the first one is there as the.
I understand. Now it's more clear because Gandhi, he chose the passive resistance, right? He needed
Yes.
to educate the people, just passive resistance.
Yeah.
But Tagore, he's modern, right?
Yeah.
So already one step towards the Western
Yes.
civilization.
Yeah, you
to
could
learn
say that.
something from the West, and then
And
pass it
then,
on.
yeah, and then you first acquire the sort of autonomy, the strength, inner strength. See, this inner is something both have. Gandhi also talked about inner freedom, but actually Tagore doesn't talk about inner freedom. It's only inner strength. It's a different thing, you know. Interior is there, you know, that you have to become something different inside of you, right? Both have this, but this inside is. So Gandhi suggests that freedom can be you know, inside, but Tagore doesn't treat it as you know, freedom is inside. What he is trying to the inside in Tagore is not, it's that which has to be transformed in order for transformation to be complete. That is, you can't say external things are transformed and I remain the same old person that I was. In that sense, the internal transformation is part of the transformation of the whole. Whereas Gandhi actually makes a distinction between the external and the internal. He says internal can be free. You can be free. You will learn to be free inside. Right? It's a different conception of freedom, which has to do with the Vedantic, you know, the Hindu thought, which actually talks about sthita prajna. That is, one who is detached from all worldly sort of connections and is able to ground himself within himself without seeking an external ground. Whereas Tagore is saying bodybuilding. So he is actually saying the spirit needs an external ground, but it has to harmonize, and therefore reconstruction is necessary.
I don't know what to say. Compared with Gandhi, this is how I feel. Tagore has a towering presence until today. The Tagore legacy. But I don't know. But again, I mean, like Gandhi, I cannot quite. So like Bengali sphere, I think it's a different story.
Yeah.
So people say everyone has their own story about Tagore, right? But Tagore is throughout the writing you feel there is of course he resorts to once he's talking to the politicians resort to Tagore.
Yeah.
But he's I don't know, his influence or legacy is larger than the sphere.
Yeah.
What is a symbolic figure or something? What are the I don't know, what are the elements and so on? That's one side of the question. The other side of the issue is what we just talked about actually can be measured, tested against actually its own implementation in terms of the school he set up. Right? It's very, very complete.
Yeah.
So you can tease out if he's imagining doing experiment with a new form of education.
Yeah. He does it, yeah.
Right? And a set of principles could be developed. And presumably, like if you want to say this is the spirit can be implemented in the larger
sphere, yeah.
other than British education.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is So he, how,
See, this is the thing. So in terms of it, so first of all, within the political domain, Gandhi is all powerful. Tagore has no role actually.
right.
You know, he's not, he's a poet. And you can see in Gandhi's response, he uses the word poet in a very, you know, the tone of it is, yes, world poet, big poet, you know, that kind of a thing.
You can say anything you want.
Yeah. In a sense that, you know, you are not very, you know, so Tagore has that kind of, in the literary domain, I mean Gandhi, literary education is of no use, he says. Tagore is all education, all literary, all, you know, reading and for the culture and so on. Gandhi is culturally a very, you know, impoverished figure. In sense, for him culture, nothing. It's only religion. Religion, at the most he'll say folk religion, you know, this thing. But there's no, the culturally speaking, Gandhians, in fact, the one famous, one of the most close disciples of Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave, he learned Sanskrit. So somebody asked him, have you read the Shakuntala, which is an ancient Sanskrit play, Kalidasa's play? And he got angry. He said, I did not learn the language of the gods to read some stupid play, he said. Is quoted. You know, so it is a characteristic of the, you know, Gandhian sphere that this idea of the refinements, you know, cultural refinement, classical taste, literature, this is alien to that. Gandhi is all powerful politically, right? Now, even in terms of what Tagore proposes and so on what he himself did in Bengal, you don't find too many people you know, taking on the same thing and doing it outside. But Gandhi, the Gandhian you know, spinning wheel, the various other programs, they spread all over India, right? But in due course, what has happened is Gandhi remains a symbolic figure, whereas Tagore's legacy has remained. You know, these hundreds, thousands of songs, his ideas, his plays, you know, which continue to have a life. And also, he was also picked up as a symbolic figure for the post-independent India. Because, for instance, in every city across India, there'll be a Rabindra hall, you know, which is for culture, you know, theatre and other things and so on. In that way, he has been the most central figure of the cultural formation that is India. So there's no, he's not a very effective presence within, you know, actual practice. You know, on the ground level, although his ideas were the most practical ones, as we saw, but they required implementation by, you know, visionaries, people who could actually get down to that task and, you know, see in the long term what you can do, right? Without saying today you'll start it and tomorrow you'll get freedom or something like that, right? So that is by its very nature, it's a kind of thing that requires patient work, organization, handling hundreds of people and so on, which was not, nobody took it up in other places, you know, to the extent that Gandhian program.
The cultural legacy, I'm asking the question, more on the sort of elite culture or what? How?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it is, see, the Bengali middle class has adopted Rabindranath's literary, musical and other works as its own, right? There is a very, you know, owning of it, very much. But it's, I think popular, right? But Rabindra Sangeet, the music, you know, the songs that he composed, he wrote and composed music for, these are sung across, you know, class barriers, across Bengal. But outside of Bengal, there is not much, you know, influence of these things. But of course, he wrote National Anthem of India. He wrote the National Anthem of two countries,
Three countries. Three. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh.
Sri Lanka?
Three.
Sri Lanka I did not know. Bangladesh, yes. So in that sense, yeah, he has a popular presence also, to some extent. Not a great deal. Outside of Bengal, not a great deal, but
He somehow also boosted promote because Vande Mataram also composed by him. Vande Mataram was a national.
Vande Mataram is not his.
No, it's written by Rabindranath,
Ah.
but then later in 1952, when it adopted as a national song,
Uh-huh.
Vande Mataram is a national song.
Right.
So then it taken from this composition, he composed a song.
Acha, acha. Music, yeah. Setting to music. He was very inventive with his music. And his music is not classical. It doesn't have all kinds of intricate. It's a song. He composes songs, and he mixes Western, North Indian, South Indian tunes, all kinds of things. He's very eclectic in his way of.
So can we say that in a way, Gandhi is more of a political man, politician,
Yeah, yeah.
and Tagore is more of a cultural man.
Well, this is the thing. Neither Gandhi nor Tagore is political, because Gandhi's very definition of his thing is without religion, politics is not. He doesn't like So he was the one who wanted politics to be redefined in a religion, with religion, right? So yes, he was the politician. You're right, but in the sense that he was both
Not in
a
the Nehru sense.
not in the Nehru sense.
Once you
Yeah.
mean Nehru is a real politician, right? Occupying the state.
Yeah. So he brought.
Gandhi has
Huh?
had quite a lot of pragmatic, not practical experiences dealing with governments in different places, and also he spent quite
Gandhi, yeah.
considerable years,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of years in Britain.
He's a lawyer, so he knows all about negotiation and all those things. Yeah, he's a very good
And
strategist.
he had probably worked out,
Yeah.
according to his experience, the best way to deal with the white man or
Right.
West is
Yeah, he was very adept. He was, the biographies are very, like when he went to London, he went twice as a lawyer to plead for his, South African community. He goes there and he has no contact, but he has, a prior experience of being there as a student and, he has no problem. He puts together people. He meets Winston Churchill and all these people in government. They talk to him, and so he has that social skills. He's a very shrewd and very sophisticated, handler of and a very good lawyer. Who obviously, the South African business community, Indians. For them he was a precious possession, because he did all the things that they couldn't do. He was very good at his thing. So yeah, he had a lot of practical skills, Gandhi, plus this religious kind of dimension. And the religious dimension is so substantially. His religious outlook was formed in London and South Africa, through contact with these new forms of Christianity, which were not the traditional Protestant or Catholic and so on, but more derivatives of Protestantism. In this, there is something called ethical church, which was set up in England in the late 19th century. Gandhi was in contact with them, and similar such all kinds of small churches, religious groups. Stemming from Christianity, but not Christian in a strict sense, but more sort of eclectic in their and interested in the idea of religions as a whole, the essence of religion, rather than this or that religion. what is religious as an abstract idea, right? I mean, this is happening in Europe, throughout the 19th century, right? Feuerbach is, talking about the essence of Christianity, and the Congress of World Religions and these kinds of events are happening, where different people from different religions gather together. And Ramakrishna's disciple Vivekananda went to one such in Chicago and became a very big success as a representative of Indian spirituality, right? So this is happening, and so he is picking up from a lot of these kinds of sources and building a kind of outlook which combined with this pragmatic political skill, knack he had, was a potent, powerful combination. Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I mean, it's almost like a cliche. Tagore seemed to have this attitude, let's take out everything the best.
Yeah, yeah.
It's our problem, we're not bringing out the best from the Englishman.
Right.
It's our problem. Right? Because of our problem. And because this problem, the Englishman cannot deliver the best.
Right.
Because I see the best there.
Yeah.
So on, right? So in a way, he wants all the best to come together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like the Chinese saying,
Theoretical best.
theoretically, yeah, 就是把好的都吸收嘛。Right? This is the Chinese modernization strategy, basically telling you that. Right? Or 中学为底，西学为用。These are the Chinese are the bases, and everything else built upon this. And the bases also need to be reformed and all that.
Yeah.
But after fair enough of attitude. But then once you come back to, after a century to reevaluate or to recount and say, yes, nice to hear this, but in reality, it doesn't work that way. You can't simply pull out certain elements and together mix up like a salad box to be a better salad or something.
Maybe that's why Gandhi said.
Huh?
Maybe that's why Gandhi said, yeah. It's all
Gandhi
very well.
has a-
It's all very well.
Gandhi, there is a basis called I guess that what he means by religion is actually very clear. It's pretty much Hindi based. And so there seems to be, and one big difference I think my understanding of the Chinese late 19th century, early 20th literati, there's very strong subjectivity. So seldom you have people like Tagore type, right? And we only emerge later when defeated, then you have these like, 100% Westernization type. But earlier, were very, very strong. Even they try to suggest certain things can be taken from other, but for specific arrangements.
Yeah.
Within the system. Partly, I don't know how to explain, but the contact between Western, the European thing was never deeply inside China, right? As it forces compared with India.
Yeah.
That's why both Gandhi and Tagore, even probably mediating through like Lee, this is British form. I don't know what is it. One feels when Gandhi cites all these references, it's already deeply English, right? And so on.
Yeah.
So that the reference itself already deep-seated in a way.
Yeah, the mediation has already taken place.
Yes.
That the voice itself is thoroughly mediated by the experience of colonialism.
So even like Tagore goes around and tells, I know you people from the inside. He has that confidence, right?
Yeah.
So it means so he's also internalized already to recognize.
Yeah.
But I also have something you don't have.
Right.
That sort of mentality and attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, see, that production of a mystery, you produce a mystery in terms of the Indian villager whom you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows. Isn't it? That is, who has remained untouched by all this. There is a move, it's a strategic sort of thing, It's a rhetorical game in a way, isn't it? Because you know the colonizer very well. And you are saying there is this, but you are also saying that I also don't know him. But and yet you know him actually, because you say that he is there, that villager.
Reading these things in a way, I think is more difficult than, in a way, very difficult than reading Gandhi. In the sense that number one is that each context is very clear. In which context he intervened, trying to say something, right?
Yeah.
But then, when he talks to published in the whatever London, you can see it's highly rhetorical in the sense that using the British politeness in order to win the argument or something, you can smell that.
In Tagore's.
Yeah, some of this you can see. So
I think in the letter to Montagu, that kind of a thing is yeah.
Yeah, or to the secretary of.
That's the Montagu, yeah. Morley, yeah.
Something along these lines. So you're not certain whether it's rhetorical or is simply.
There's a certain evasiveness about it, yeah. He's trying to, dancing around the issue in a way. You're not saying. But it's also, in terms of what he wants to say, yeah, it adopts that British ambivalent, sayings but not saying type of thing.
Eventually resort to moral reasoning.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense that this is you're against your own values.
Yeah.
You can be better with it.
Right.
And so on. Which is, seems to be shared by both Gandhi and Tagore.
Yeah, and many people before that. I mean, it's a running theme in Indian sort of response to colonial rule. This un-British rule, from Dadabhai Nauroji in the 19th century onwards. Un-British rule, you can do better is a constant theme.
This is shared by the probably left in Britain. More the ones supporting emancipation.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we should, because I think we need to also, I need to catch a train, so we'll wind up. Okay. So next time we're reading Ambedkar, and Ambedkar is available now to all of you, right? Yeah, so pagination was a problem which has been sorted out. So we will read Ambedkar. Ambedkar, again a lawyer, with a Western education, but he didn't change his clothes all that much. But we'll see tomorrow, next week. Was from the lowest, one of the lowest caste groups, untouchable caste. Ambedkar comes from a background of that kind, from a Maharashtra, the western state, and rises to be a leader of the untouchables. Within the Congress and outside, he fights many battles. And of course, in order to be a leader of the untouchables, he has to take on, like, we saw how Tagore has to, take on Gandhi, right? Similarly, Ambedkar is also, confronted with Gandhi. And Ambedkar, Tagore's confrontation is much more on an intellectual plane. ideas playing. Ambedkar's is on the political ground. It's a bang in there on the political thing. So it's very different, and so and it's much more bitter conflicts and so on.
But he's seen as more extremist.
Who?
Ambedkar?
No, Ambedkar is a liberal. He's Ranade. Ranade is one of his heroes, intellectual heroes, actually. He's left, on the left of the center, but no, by no means. He's also somebody who takes the same line as Tagore on the politics or society question.